red meat, etc., it doesn't say that much about actual ingredients. So we have to be very careful about that, also with certain ingredients as being healthy or less healthy. If you allow me, Chair, I'd like to say a few words about food-based dietary guidelines, because I believe that is an essential tool to help consumers, but also producers and processors, to make available and to promote those products that are part of a healthy diet. Yeah, maybe I'll leave it there. I have a few more topics to mention, but that might be better for a next round.
Okay, thank you very much. Emma, let me turn to you. Give us the consumer's perspective.
Yes, thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. First of all, I'd just like to introduce BEUC. We are the European Consumer Organisation, and we represent 46 independent national consumer organisations across 32 European countries. And in the food team at BEUC, a lot of our work really touches upon food environments and trying to improve food environments to make the healthier choice, the easier choice for consumers, which we know is very often, too often, not the case for consumers today. So we really welcome that this concept of food environments has become much more mainstream in recent years. As was mentioned already, the Farm to Fork strategy explicitly mentions food environments as an important tool or important concept to consider when trying to make those choices healthier for consumers. And I think that the key to food environments is the recognition that there are multiple different pressures on consumers which can lead them towards unhealthier choices. And the choices that we make are significantly shaped by the context within which we make those choices. So we know today that obesity levels are extremely high. We have 1 in 2 adults who are already overweight or obese, and very worryingly, we have 1 in 3 children who are overweight or obese and who are much more likely now to have to be affected by the non-communicable diseases associated with these conditions. So we really have a great scope and great opportunity in another way to tackle this obesity crisis, because we know that not one single issue has caused these high levels. And I think that's really important to underline, that with the food environment concept, that there is no panacea. There is no one policy tool which will be the silver bullet to tackle all these issues. Sometimes I've seen in discussions about a certain food policy tool that they are attacked or criticized because they don't solve obesity levels, or they don't reduce obesity levels immediately. For example, the Nutri-Score, the front of pack nutrition label in France, leaving aside the fact that it was only introduced in 2017 in France, so therefore it doesn't work. That the Nutri-Score has and we have to make sure that we don't place the burden of fixing the food system on one particular policy tool. So we need to not just look at front of pack nutrition labeling, we need to look at availability, affordability, marketing, and perhaps we'll discuss this a little bit more. There's great scope to do a lot more on, and reformulation, as has already been mentioned, and not to forget retail environments, which can often be very unhealthy for consumers. So I look forward to discussing this, and I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much, Valentina. On how we create healthy food policies.
And thank you very much for this great opportunity. International wholesaler specialist operating in 34 countries and based in Germany, in Düsseldorf. Actually, Metro is a company which is really contributing to provide a sustainable supply chain by looking at each step of the supply chain and by offering to the customer a wider range of products. And indeed, Metro is committed and following really concrete objectives in the area of sustainable food, but not only. And actually, we are really working in the area of reformulation and organic range by extending our range of organic food. But not only, also focus on food waste, sustainable fish and seafood, palm oil, sustainable palm oil, soy, and many other positions and policy in the area of sustainability. So when it comes to healthier products, as I said, we are definitely working in providing an offer for the customer which is healthier and also more sustainable. But on the other hand, so we are the main contributor on the supply chain. But what is for me also very important in order to success all together in this effort is to stimulate and to raise awareness to the final demand, to the final customers, in order to allow him to buy the product, so with the reasonable price, with the availability and everything that is related to that. So in this, I'm really happy to be here in this discussion, and I'm looking forward to all the inputs that we will get and all the very much.
For your info. I would love to hear from your opening comments what you're working on and what's important to you at the moment.
Thank you very much. So I'm a professor, as mentioned, in nutrition, and I work with appetite regulation, energy intake and obesity, body weight regulation, and risk factors for diabetes and cardiovascular disease. And I've been doing that for quite some time, and always with the goal to try to find the evidence of the influence what we eat, how much we eat, and then body weight regulation and risk factors in the long term. And what we have been looking at for, well, already 20 years ago was the role of non-caloric sweeteners versus sugar as a tool to achieve a more healthy and less energy-dense diet with less sugar. And we saw then about 20 years ago that 10 weeks at Lipton diet was actually very efficient when you substituted sugar with non-caloric sweeteners in reducing energy intake and body weight and fat mass in a population of overweight participants. And this was about 20 years, as mentioned, but other studies have found the same, and meta-analysis and reviews. And still there are many myths and fake facts out there circulating among lay people, among, well, policymakers probably, but also scientists, about the role of those non-caloric sweeteners in achieving a healthy diet and a body weight healthy diet. So that was actually quite interesting. But then recently we were lucky to get an EU grant, a large EU grant, Horizon 2020, where I'm co-coordinating together with researchers from the University of Liverpool, and where we are 29 partners from industry, universities, and different organizations. And we are looking at the role of those compounds, sweeteners and sweetness enhancers, for achieving health, to reduce obesity, to obtain a safe diet, but also in the context of sustainability. So that is actually very interesting, I think. And we look forward to get some more data, the evidence that we can really say and inform politicians and policymakers, and also the lay people, but also health professionals, how these compounds really can help achieving a healthy and sustainable diet also in the long term. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Yes, indeed. Well, let's start ask about what may be the role for industry. Christine, perhaps you could tell me, as an MEP, as a policymaker, what sort of input do you need from industry?
I think the food industry plays really a crucial role to reach a healthier food environment. We need to include all stakeholders along the food supply chain, producers, manufacturers, retailers, and also the consumer. We need to look at the challenges to find ways for a better contribution. On the one hand, lacks of transparency across the entire food supply chain. We need to better know and to understand where our food comes from. And this is extremely, I think, for processed food. And food fraud is a direct consequence of the production issue. There's probably 10 times more olive oil from Italy on the market than the country could actually produce. And on the other hand, we need food who is affordable for everyone. And the producer, the farmer, needs to receive a fair income. They need appreciation for their work, and they need to appreciate the food. And food waste and food loss needs to be addressed. No farmer wants to produce for the bin, and the supermarkets don't want to throw out food. So the consumer don't want to spend money on food which is too much. So all these thin fields need to be tackled. Many approach can contribute for healthier food environment, I think.
Let's turn to Stinica. Same question for you. What's the role of industry?
First of all, a strong role among all actors along the food supply line, and food industry is one of the main actors, obviously. I think in my opening statement, I already mentioned that food reformulation is a key step. If we look at what overall we have been started to eat a lot of, it's processed food, and often processed those ingredients that we should rather see less, like sugar, fats, and salt. So food reformulation to produce foods that contain less of these harmful ingredients would be really a helpful step. But obviously it's not the only step. So one, you have food reformulation. Two, you have the packaging and the informing of consumers what is in there. So the labeling and specifically the front of pack labeling with very clear statements, what is out there. I believe in Chile, they have this very clear example of very clear warnings, what is there and what could be harmful for your health if it has crossed a certain limit. I think that is something we could possibly also introduce in the EU. Very clear front of pack labeling that is informative to consumers, and that also makes it very transparent to consumers to know, could this particular product be part of a healthy diet? Or I'd like to go back to what I said earlier, also to always be able to link back to a full diet. So it's not one single food that makes up a healthy diet. One single food or product cannot be labeled as being healthy because the diet is healthy and certain products contribute more to a healthy diet than other products. So of healthy diets is extremely important, and then the food industry can support with producing those products or processing those foods that could be part of a healthy diet. Having said that, I mentioned the food reformulation, I mentioned the labeling. packaging is part of it, but also the marketing of products. I believe it's very important that the food industry respects those rules. For example, children. The WHO has formulated some guidelines for marketing to children. Yeah, those rules and regulations are taken into account to ensure that the food environment is a good place for consumers, including children, to pick a diet. So let me stop there and over to you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Valentina, from your perspective, what is, obviously industry does have a big role to play, but where do they need to do more? What more should there be done? Give us your perspective.
Yeah, sure. I think food industry definitely play, but it's only a small part of the supply chain. So the role that they have is of course to produce healthier product, and this is actually something that looks, as we are now discussing, looks quite easy, but in the end is not so easy, because we know that a food product has to be with certain characteristics to be accepted by the final consumer. So that means having a proper taste, a proper texture, a proper color, for example. So the customers are used to a certain product, and when we go to reformulation, the aim is actually to have the same product, but of course with a healthier profile. And so the food industry is actually the only stakeholder here that can via research and via innovation, find the right formulation of the product which is accepted by the consumer. And then, of course, it let's say the next step is for example, for retailers or a wholesaler as us to offer and distribute the product across the countries, and to allow the customer to see the product in the store or in the supermarket, to visualize it, to see it among the entire offer that we can find usually in stores and supermarkets. So to identify the healthier option, and to take a decision, to make a choice, to decide whether to go for this product or whether to go for some other product. But of course, the key part is to find the right formulation for the product to be sold and to be acceptable by the customer. And of course, we we work as a retailer, as a wholesaler, we work closely with producer, and we actually try to support this way of working, so this way of reformulating product, or even to create new product to be launched on the market with already with a healthier profile. And we can only do that by engaging the entire organization internally, so by raising awareness of this matter and of all of these topics, and as well as outside, so to communicate to our customers what we are doing, why we are doing it, and where we want to go with this huge effort that everybody in the supply chain is actually doing. So that's actually from my side.
Okay. Thank you. Let me remind our audience once again that you can ask questions, use the ask function and write your question in the box there, and also do continue the conversation online using the hashtag #EADebates. And let me come to you now and ask where you see the role of industry. We've heard from different stakeholders.
Well, obviously the industry has a huge role, but I also think they are quite happy to change a lot of things depending on the consumer demands. So the consumer has a huge role as well to change what really is produced by industry. For instance, in Denmark, there's now a big demand for plant-based foods. Much bigger supply in the shops, in the stores, in the restaurants for such foods that are plant-based or vegetables or vegetarian or whatever. And that's really important, I think, if we want to change what people eat, which I think is the ultimate goal. And price is very important. And there the government is important. And as soon as you change the price on the foods that you want people to eat, then something happens. It's been shown again and again with different fat reduction or fat-induced tax or sugar-induced tax. And at some point, there was actually a differentiation in the price on Diet Coke and regular Coke. So the Diet Coke was cheaper, and it changed the consumers, what they purchased. So the government has a huge role, but I think industry really is quite willing to change according to consumer demands. So it goes in a circle, you could say. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, Emma, perhaps you can pick up on that idea that consumers have power if they want to use it. They vote with their feet. Is that something you see?
Well, what we often hear is that actually consumers maybe have never had so much choice in front of them, but very often it can still feel like there's really only one choice offered to them. And we know that food choices are shaped by many influences beyond an individual consumer's control. So relying on consumers to do the quote unquote right thing, it hasn't worked in the past. We have relied on consumer education campaigns for many years, decades even, and we can see that hasn't had the impact which is necessary. So we really need to look at other ways to encourage consumers to choose healthier choices. And when we talk about the food industry's role, I think it's been mentioned before, it has a crucial role to play. What I would say is that it's really important that we cannot rely only on the food industry to do this by themselves. What we often see is that there may be some front runners who are willing to go that extra step, so are willing to maybe show a front of pack nutrition label, they're willing to reformulate the products, maybe they're even willing to reduce their marketing to children. But because there is no level playing field, they're less willing to do so because their competitors aren't doing so. So we really need public authorities to be deep in the driving seat to take responsibility for ensuring that consumers can make a healthier choice by enacting regulations. Because so far, when we've seen voluntary codes of conduct or voluntary pledges, for example, the self-regulatory pledge for marketing to children, it's unfortunately very weak. We have the example in France where our member found that although the self-regulatory marketing pledge found that it was almost 100% compliant, 88% of the products which were advertised to children were either Nutri-Score D or E. So there's a big area there that we can really improve. So we would really like to see the food industry move where they can, but also for that to be backed up by action from public authorities.
Well, thank you. Stinneke, let me ask you a very specific question about the role of different food ingredients, such as low or no-calorie sweeteners, and what sort of a role they could play in having a sustainably healthy diet.
Thank you for that question. I believe Anne already alluded a little bit to that question. I am not the perfect expert to ask you that, but as I mentioned before, I think that food reformulation, lowering levels of sugar in certain, for example, sugary based beverages can help a lot. But I still think that we have to look at the entire diet. And I believe that is where we should really inform consumers about. The previous speaker already said there is a strong role for public authority to play there. So let me say a bit more words about. But I think it's important. So food-based dietary guidelines can inform consumers according to what can be produced in that area, and at the same time strengthen consumers, so build that consumer power in order to possibly also then change producers to produce different foods. But food-based dietary guidelines can at the same time also inform producers what to produce, so making that choice for the consumer also easier. Dietary guidelines need to be pushed through the public channel, but of course informed by sound and solid scientific evidence, and there it's where the academic sector comes in. I think that could really create an enabling and even more level playing field for all producers and consumers, and even policymakers to build a food environment that is good for producers and for consumers to make their healthier choice. So I'm sorry for evading your question. I'm being very honest with you, but I believe you really need to look at the entire diet there.
Thank you. Valentina, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, actually, I agree with Tinke, because the fact that, of course, we can offer several products with, in this case, for example, we are talking about reduced sugar, but still many of the products that has a high quantity of sugar are not necessary for our diet. And therefore, it's also important to boost the education of so when we are still young, so where we can start to be educated what is really necessary and what is our maximum intake, for example, of sugar that we need to have on a daily basis. So in general, from our side, in terms of sugar, this is one of the pillars of our health and nutrition policy, 2018, internationally, so globally, but even earlier, if we look at the countries, local countries, like, for example, France, we are working on reducing sugar in our products, and we have already quite some amount of products with lower sugar comparing to original recipe. One point, let's say, where we are struggling, I would say, from our side, as we are a wholesaler, we are actually a partner for professionists and for HoReCa customers, and here it's probably more difficult for us to communicate, to engage our customers, the professionals, in understanding what we are doing. Nevertheless, we are also working on this part of the let's say of the pillar of health and nutrition concept to educate or to inform our customer on what we are doing, and as well as working on developing some digital solution which might be useful for the restaurant owner, for example, to inform the client who is going to his restaurant and what is, let's say, what is ordering, what is consuming, what was in terms of health and nutrition. And what is, as being a global company, international company, our target would be, or our, let's say, support for us would be to have an harmonized developing product for several countries. And this would be really, let's say, helping and really making clear to the final customer in any countries where he's going to buy the product, what is the labeling scheme that has been used and how to read it and how to utilize it. So the point is that the consumer needs really to be educated also in understanding what is provided on the product, on the labeling. Otherwise, the risk is to have perhaps several information on the label, but the message is not transferred to the final customer.
Thank you. Emma, perhaps I could also have your thoughts on different sorts of options available to consumers.
Yeah, well, I think just to go back to the sort of the topic about reformulation, we have seen many food manufacturers opting for these low-calorie sweeteners as a means to reformulate some of their products. Where we would have concerns about the use of sweeteners would be with the fact that they don't change the sweetness level. So the taste preference for sweeter products is still maintained. And we know that there are many products with very, very high levels of sugar in them, especially children's products as well, which have or which are very, very sugary. And we know that children are innately attracted to the sugary taste. So for us, we would really like to see a reduction, not just in sugar, but also in the taste, to try and avoid setting in stone taste preferences from an early age for more sugary products. What we see sometimes is that food producers may prefer to create new lower calorie versions of their original product using sweeteners, but very often, unfortunately, they don't touch the original recipe, which tends to be the bestseller and the highest contributor to sugar consumption in their portfolio. So we would really like to see food producers gradually reducing sugar, especially in their bestsellers, where they might have the most meaningful impact on healthier choices.
Thank you very much, Emma. I'm seeing quite a few comments coming in from our audience there, some pointing out that it's a lifestyle that's healthy, not specifically a diet or a food. Others saying, how do we change the entire landscape so that the consumer can only buy healthy food? It's possibly quite an extreme way to go about it. But Christine, another point has also been raised regarding purchase decisions and how people can be encouraged to make healthy choices, given that there's a sort of anti-science sentiment at the moment. So I'd like to ask you, what is the best way to include science or expert opinion in helping people to make these choices?
On the one hand, we have to look really clear what science says to us, that we don't take decision out of the stomach. I think it's very important to look what science said about food ingredients, what science said about how dangerous is, for example, to eat too much sugar. And on the other hand, we have to recognize that one hand is what we eat every day, but for really a healthy diet and really healthy lifestyle, we need to make sports. It's very important that we move, and I think now in the COVID-19 pandemic, we all see it. The whole time we sit here in front at our desk in front of the screen, we don't have too much sport, too much movement, and I think on the one hand it's very important what science said about different food ingredients, but on the other hand also what they say about our completely lifestyle. So only a diet cannot solve really our problems that we have with obesity and all the illness about the wrong lifestyle. I think we have to look really clear in all these points. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'd like to get your thoughts on the importance of using expert opinion and scientific advice in a way that's understandable to consumers.
Yes, that is, of course, very important, but I don't think we can go directly to the consumers, of course, but it has to go through more official bodies if it has to have a great impact. So there the policy makers and the public health professionals and journalists are really important. And if there is a general trend, I think, that journalists pick up the bad stories or the more the stories that give rise to more, you could say, surprise. So they don't pick up, for instance, if we publish or someone publish a nice paper where they show that there's no difference if you consume, for instance, sugar or non-caloric sweetened foods and drinks in relation to, let me just say, breast cancer. There was a recent paper on that. So that's not picked up by journalists, but they pick it up if there's some difference and if it goes in direction of something being bad, like non-caloric sweeteners, which has been claimed to have these strange effects or unhealthy effects for many years, and the science is really not supporting those myths and claims. So there's a big role for scientists, but there's also a big role for the people who convey the messages from the scientists to the public. And could I just add a small comment on what was mentioned before about reducing sugar and sweet tasting foods and drinks? And in general, I agree with everything that has been said. But there was a very nice study in the US where they showed that people who were on a diet for up to 1 year, that were allowed either water or Diet Coke, for instance, so non-caloric sweetened drinks. The ones who got the water, they achieved a weight loss about 2 kilo or so after 1 year. And the ones who had the Diet Coke achieved a weight loss easier to comply to a healthy or a weight-reducing diet, at least for so long. And it was also not conceived as less satiating. Actually, it was conceived as more satiating than the people who were only allowed to drink water. So we should be careful to say that we cannot consume anything sweet because we need
the link. Valentina, perhaps I could get your thoughts. I mean, Anne mentioned there about getting the message to consumers regarding what science is or isn't saying. Do you see any role there for wholesalers like yourselves, or is this something that comes further down the line?
Definitely, as being directly in the business, we are probably a bit distant from science for what I can see, but us for anything that we want to do and we want to, let's say, stress our producer to do, we only when we are going to do some changes in our product, or we study any possible change on product reform, on product composition and recipes, we always have to have a look at science in the sense of what is then going to be our product in the end. And science is also supporting innovation is what is actually bringing us the future products that we will have in our stores. So we were talking about plant-based products, and of course this is a great opportunity and a wonderful product to be offered to the customers. But definitely what the consumers, for example, if we take some alternative drinks, what the consumer want is still a drink which probably in texture, in color, in mouthfeel will be very similar to milk. And therefore here where it comes to innovation, so the production process, what is the best method to produce this product in order that the final product will be accepted. So science and any organization which will be always supporting us in research, in development, in innovative products, not only us, but of course the producer who are delivering us the final product.
Thank you. Emma, did you want to come back in on any of these points that we've been discussing?
Sure, yeah. I'm sorry, my stream cut out a little bit, so I missed some of the discussion, but I heard that there was reference to the confusing messages sometimes reported in the media. And the confusion that they already have about food issues. And maybe I could just mention that in general, there is an issue of consumer confidence and consumer trust an action a couple of years ago about honest food labels, because even though the EU food law says that information given to consumers must be accurate and credible, there's a great number of grey areas where food companies sometimes skirt around the edges of what is accurate. And we find that in many countries, consumer, so 85% and 84% of Dutch and German consumers do not trust what's on the label. So I think that points to a wider issue of consumer confidence in how food information is conveyed to them. Our action focused on misleading food labeling practices such as fruits on the front of the pack when actually there's only a few drops of fruit juice in the product, artisanal or traditional products which use additives, and whole grain products which are have very little whole grain. Our Spanish member found a biscuit which was advertised as whole grain, but you would have to eat 25 biscuits of or 25 cookies of this biscuit brand to get the same fiber amount of fiber as an apple. So these kinds of we call them tricks of the trade, really don't engender consumer confidence. So we would really like to see a more honest approach towards consumers in general.
Thank you, Emma. Let me turn now to another question from our audience. And Christine, I think perhaps you would be well placed to answer this. The question is, what is your view on advertising self-regulation?
I think this question is discussed actively at the Farm to Fork strategy. I think we lose and waste the appreciation of the work done during the production of agriculture products, all the things, and I think self-regulation not really function in the past. We need more education, we need more information for the consumer, and then we need regulation about labeling, that the consumer that was informed and all the information on the front of all the food stuff. So I think not too many regulation on the one hand, but some things we do all over the European Union. I don't support bans in all ways, because I think it's very important that the consumer understands, and it's not our function as politicals to say someone what he should eat or what he should drink. Our thing is to say, when you drink this and when you eat this, these are the consequences. So I think on the one hand, education is very, very important, and then we need mandatory nutrition labeling all about the European Union, that not every country has other labeling, and if you go to other land you don't understand it. I think that's the right way to go.
Thank you. What's your view on self-regulation in that area?
Was that for me? Sorry, my stream cut out.
Yes, sorry, Emma, that is
yes,
for you.
Okay.
Just regarding self-regulation on marketing to children.
Certainly. Yeah, I think it's a really crucial topic, and it's something that we work on a lot in believe that self-regulation unfortunately hasn't delivered the results that are necessary to protect children and adolescents who are vulnerable consumers, who are especially vulnerable to the marketing messages and techniques which are used especially in the digital age, because these kind of marketing techniques tend to be very subtle but no less persuasive. And what we find with self-regulation is that the rules tend to be very, very weak. So in Europe we have the EU pledge, which continues to allow very sugary biscuits, ice cream, crisps to be advertised to children, which they define themselves as under 12 years old, when we know that teenagers, that's a key demographic for marketing strategies. They are also vulnerable to these marketing techniques. So we would really like to see a much stronger regulation of marketing to children rules, which protect children and teenagers, that has a much stricter approach in terms of what is defined as healthy enough to be advertised to children. And also we need to make sure that we cover the exposure and power of marketing strategies on TV, but now on digital platforms, so social media, Instagram, influencers, TikTok, all these avenues are being used to advertise unhealthy products to children, unfortunately. So we really need to step up our game in terms of protecting these vulnerable consumers.
Thank you. Stinika, perhaps you could add something to this discussion as well.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I was listening to the conversation, and then earlier in this conversation, we said public education is extremely important. And then I also heard saying something about the level playing field is very important, but we spoke about level playing field for businesses or industries. And then combining this with the discussion about marketing and self-regulation, we need to put these things into perspective. I don't have the exact numbers here, but if you look at what is available for public budget for public education, marketing of some of these less healthier options, it's completely off balance. So it's so easy that if you have a public education campaign to bring that completely, to undo it completely with some marketing for unhealthier foods, or unhealthier products. So I believe that I agree that self-regulation has a limited, it's perspective also, looking at the funds that are available for the several messages that could go out. So I really, there is a strong role for regulation. The public sector, the government should put in place some rules and regulations within which that marketing could take place. Thanks a lot.
Well, we talked a bit about regulation and so on, and possible reform, and the farm to fork. But Christine, perhaps you could tell us what we can expect in the future in this policy area.
At the one hand, about all the things about food labeling, we discuss in the farm to fork strategy about the nutrition labeling, and on the other hand, about the ecological footprint labeling and the regional labeling and animal welfare. I think that are stones, very, very important things to give the information for the consumer that he can decide what he or she's eating. So on the one hand, a lot of things about labeling. On the other side, the reduction about pesticides, about fertilizer, and all these things to make our food more sustainable, and the food supply chain. And the third thing I can only repeat we discuss about is the education and the information beginning in the kindergarten over to the school and to the whole society. And I think these are the very important thing to reach. We also have to make decisions about food waste. At the moment, too many food goes in the bin, and that's not okay. We have to discuss if the price is the right way, or also the thing to make it clear for the consumer. And when we discuss on political level, for a lot of countries in the European Union, the food price is very important. And some of the discussions said it at the beginning. We have to think how we can support the sustainable and the best food in form of prices, about taxes, about lower taxes, But I think that are decisions in our member states, but we discuss it now on the political level. So on the one hand, labeling, on the other hand, education, and the third thing to discuss about food prices, that the sustainable and the best food is the cheapest, because a lot of consumer has decided over money, and they cannot buy the cost too much money, the food. So we have to look very, very careful to the price. Thank you.
Well, our last question then to the COVID pandemic, and I'm just interested to know, do you think that people's and policies towards healthy eating versus obesity and so on, and taking into account that we need a sustainable and resilient food supply chain, have changed because of the pandemic? And perhaps I could get your thoughts on whether you think there's been a shift in general in people's thinking.
Yes, I think there has, at least in many people's thinking, not every. In this area has probably changed to a higher priority, because it's so evident that obesity, well, people with obesity or overweight were more at risk when they achieved or the aspect, but also because of our way of living during the corona pandemic. We are more sedentary, as someone already said, less physical active, and maybe you snack more because you're bored. So the whole thing has been raising awareness, I think, in the public view, but also in among policymakers. So it's become a higher priority to make people more eat better and move more to reduce obesity and overweight. And in the end, it saves money.
Okay. Valentina, have you noticed any shifts or changes as a result of the COVID pandemic?
Well, from our side, I cannot really judge whether there was a change from the business perspective in terms of choice. So from the customer choice and direction. Of course, as you can imagine, as we are a wholesaler, we were heavily affected by the fact that business were closed for a really long time. And therefore, we had to take some measurements in order to go through this situation. And luckily, we are close to see, let's say, a normality also in our businesses, in our stores, and in our location all over the 34 countries. So I cannot really say whether there was really a difference in terms of in the tendency where the customers were going, which product we're selecting and buying. But definitely we saw a reduction in were closed across several countries.
The same question to you then, on whether you think there has been a change or a shift precipitated by the COVID pandemic.
Sorry,
Emma, changed due to the COVID pandemic.
Yes, getting COVID. I think, though, it comes back to the food environments as well, the question of food environments. There was more awareness maybe from consumers, but they were still making their food and beverage choices within a food environment, which still pushed them towards unhealthier food choices. So the sort of the nutritionally poor foods, which were which consumers are increasingly pushed to buy, that remains the same situation now. What we have seen is maybe some governments taking action. I know in the UK recently they announced a 9 p.m. watershed for marketing to kids for the TV, and then an online ban on paid for advertising. So I'm hoping that this marks the start of a shift towards governments taking more action to to regulate the food environment to make it healthier for consumers, but also especially for children who we know were spending so much more time on screens. So they were socializing, they were being educated, they were using screens for leisure time with like gaming platforms and so on. All this means that they were probably more exposed to digital marketing. So we really need to remember that, yes, there maybe might have been more awareness raised, but unless we tackle the causes of an unhealthy food environment, we will see probably little effect, unfortunately.
Thank you. And Stinika, has the pandemic changed anything from your perspective? What sort of work is UN Nutrition doing, and has it been altered, or has it been a shift because of the pandemic?
Thanks. Thanks for the question, because last year we did indeed a questionnaire asking consumers worldwide if there were any changes in their consumer behavior. And there was an interesting outcome there. So indeed, there was much more awareness, as Emma also mentioned already. But there was also much more home cooking, specifically in the European area. And that is interesting, because that awareness linked with home cooking creates a lot of opportunities for behavior, consumer behavior. You're more aware of what are the ingredients for a meal, for a healthy meal. You're more, also we found out that consumers are more aware of where the food is coming from and how vulnerable the supply lines can be. Even though, at least in Europe, we were fine, you still saw that consumers were worried about where does the food come from. So that awareness led to, on the one hand, also a desire to contribute to more resilient food systems or resilient supply lines. So people were more conscious about buying their foods closer to their homes, shorter supply lines, supporting local suppliers or local producers. And I think that's also a very important element. And it links a little bit back to what we said earlier in the conversation when you asked sustainable, healthy diets. That is an upcoming topic. And I believe that has been really pushed, I hope, a little bit by the COVID pandemic. So that consumer awareness in combination with more resilient food systems, more sustainable food systems that should become more visible and tangible in the food environment. I really hope that is something we are going to, let's say, win from the pandemic.
Thank you. And I'm seeing a lot of comments in the chat. We won't go through them all now, but I just want to thank our audience for being so engaged. A lot of comments agreeing with most of what you are saying. But we've just a few minutes left, so let's get a final round of comments from everyone. Just telling me on what your expectations or hopes are, or your final message. Christine, I will start with you.
Thank you so much. I want to say something to the last question about the pandemic, because I can agree a lot what the others said, but I think the COVID has made many people realize that we need to pay more attention to our health, and I think that's a very important thing. So that many people really looked what happens with their health and how important a sustainable diet is for our health. And on the other hand, that the work of our farmers is so important, and that we have to be independent in the European Union in food production, that we can produce our own food in the European Union. And I think that's very important for the future. And on the other hand, I always can repeat education, education, and education. And before I was a member of the European Parliament, I was a lot of years in the Parliament in my home area, and we talk a lot important to get on the one hand the kids, and on the other hand the parents of the kids to think more about sustainable and really has the key role how agriculture, how our farmer produce in the European Union. With our decision, when we go to buy our foodstuff, we decide how agriculture will look in the European Union. And for this, we need the education and we need the labeling, that the education comes to the consumer and that he can decide. And the last point I want to point out, we can put a lot of information on the front pack, but not all information. So for me, it's very important to get a digital solution. For example, a QR code in the front pack label, and the consumer can get a lot of information about the QR. It can be a very good chance for our food producer. Thank you so much.
Morning. Stinika, can I have your closing thoughts? What's your final message?
Yes, thank you. I really liked the conversation also because it's more and more went to the direction not just of specific foods, but rather of the entire diet, and not just a healthy diet, but also a sustainable healthy diet. That is, I believe, where we need to go. So how can we make sure that the food environment where we pick the foods that are part of a sustainable healthy diet is as enabling, as facilitating as it can possibly be to facilitate consumers to make those good choices. So sustainable healthy diets that are good for healthy people, but also for the environment, the planetary health. Policy, and that is starting today already. And I believe that our governments, also regional governments like the EU, need to work towards that goal and make it possible, of course, supported by solid evidence, what constitutes a healthy diet, and not just a healthy diet, but
Emma, perhaps, if you can hear me, Emma.
Yeah, I think I can just echo that point that what we would like to see is public health authorities really in the driving seat to bring in the kind of policy tools, effective policy tools, which have been proved to work that can help consumers when they're in the supermarket choose healthier or more sustainable sustainable consumption last year, which found that 2/3 of consumers are willing and open to change their eating habits for environmental reasons, for example. But at the same time, only 16% of consumers were happy with the actions that their governments were doing in this area, and they need more help to be able to choose a more sustainable option. So I really welcome that we've had this conversation about food environments, because I think it's a good indication that there's a recognition that it's not just one reason behind the issues that the food system is facing, and we really look forward to the implementation of some of the key policy tools in the farm to fork strategy, including the front of pack nutrition labelling, which MEP Schneider also mentioned, and also decide to take further action on marketing to children. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. And Valentina, your closing remarks, please.
Definitely for us is key to have this look at what is the challenge, what are the challenges from a business perspective. So we are definitely in favor of, as I said also previously, of a harmonized way of labeling across at least European countries to allow the consumer to have a clear we are providing on our product, as well as also to stress again our effort in being committed in several policies across different topics on sustainability, on health and nutrition. So our work that we are constantly on a daily basis doing together with our suppliers and producer, and of course with all the stakeholders involved in making the products healthier and available in our stores. Of course, the challenge on the price, which was also raised during the discussion, is very important to tackle. And for us, it's not only the price, but also availability of raw materials. As well as really the eye on the final quality and final result of a reformulated product. So 2 points more, digitalization is key, as it was also said during the discussion. So we are very in favor of working on making information available also on a digital base, and as well as trust. So how we can build trust is, of course, giving transparency, giving the right information, and we are working internally constantly to have all the information needed for our customer and everything tracked from the farm.
Thank you, Valentina. And finally, let me turn to you. What's your last message that you'd like to leave our audience with?
Thank you very much. I very much agree with what has been said, especially by Christine, regarding information, education for children. It's really important. Emma also said a lot about that. And you have a big each country has a big responsibility, of course, because you can only do so much on an EU level. So that's really important. And finally, I would just emphasize again the SWEET project, which it's going to show some interesting results, I believe, in about 2 years' time, as an example of how we can change a diet towards something more sustainable and healthy, or at least that's what I expect. So thank you very much.
Very much, and indeed, ladies, thank you to all of you for an interesting and stimulating conversation today. I know wide-ranging discussion on the possible solutions and a way to ensure a healthier lifestyle for all Europeans. Thank you to our audience and for your questions and your attention. This discussion has been supported by the International Sweeteners Association, but keep your eyes out on social media using that hashtag soon. Have a great day.